back to Gaming Roundtable. Thank you, sponsor. Anyway, this title is called To Souls or Not to Souls, and as you can see, I am got one of my favorite games on the PS4 loaded up. I am playing an Executioner. This is Lords of the Fallen, a game that takes a lot of kill cues from Dark Souls. And just a reference real quick, way back when Dark Souls came out, I'd heard about Demon Souls, but did not own a PS2. And decided I was glutton for punishment, and actually, frankly, went to a GameStop and decided, well, I'll try this Dark Souls out. Let's see what all the hubbub and stuff is about. And for some reason, because I'm an old school gamer, grew up on the old school NES and Super NES, where games were very hard and nobody held your hand, I really fell in love with Dark Souls. Although, I played the heck out of that game. Did I ever completely complete the game? Not 100%, but I still enjoyed playing it, and still is one of my favorite games on the Xbox 360 to this day. I also own Dark Souls 2 Scholar of First Sin that I got for my PS4. I like the game, but to be honest with you, the new director, he kind of like dropped the ball, to be honest with you. But that's a whole nother video to get into. You know, a whole nother, not really so much a rant, but a critique. Anyway, Gaming Roundtable here. We do not review games. I don't review nothing. I discuss stuff. Talk about things as a gaming unit that's near and dear to me. And I want to talk about the Souls or not the Souls. And let's set the Wayback Machine back on the PS1 days. You all remember the PS1, the little CD system that could, you know, I think everyone owned one at one time or another. And one of the things that I've talked about when it comes to the system per se, which is, it was such a big and popular, you know, 800-pound gorilla at the time in there. And I will say that one of the games that was defining for that system was Resident Evil. And yes, did I play through Resident Evil? Yeah. I still think Resident Evil 2 is my favorite game out of the series. And I'm the one guy, though, out there that will tell you, man, I really liked Operation Raccoon City. And I know some people go like, how could you like that? The game sucked. Well, you know, when they patched it, it came pretty good. The online was fun. I enjoyed being able to take a gun to Leon's head and kill his ass. Okay, that's a little dark side of me coming out. But anyway, but when Resident Evil came out, it produced a complete and total crazy rash of clones, you know, where a bunch of games played very similar with the tank controls, and the different camera angles, and the way it played, the inventory systems, from Martian Gothic, you know, to Vampire Hunter D, and Vampire Reign, and not Vampire Reign, that was a 360 title. Vampire Knight, sorry, there's a lot of vampire games that came out, and a whole slew of Ease formula, right? But, you know, this happens with games that are popular. The gaming industry has always done that. You know, there's always been, hey, Tony Hawk's popular, so 2-3 other skate games come out. This game comes out, and a bunch of developers jump on the bandwagon and make the same type of game, and that's kind of what they do. And it's interesting to me because this series, Dark Souls, let's go all the way up to the Souls series, you would think by now, you know, given that history repeating its lesson here, that there would be, you know, a slew of games that have already come out that would be like basically identical to Dark Souls. And there really isn't, you know. There is Lords of the Fallen, probably one of the first, to be honest. Borrowed very heavily from Dark Souls, obviously, its influence, but, you know, it's a little bit more forgiving in its combat, and you kind of are, you know, it's okay to take a few hits, but it pretty much borrows from Souls. It is basically, City Interactive basically made their version of Dark Souls. I don't think that that's a bad thing. Imitation is a form of flattery, you know, in that sense. And I don't fault them. I don't think it's a bad thing that they did it, because honestly, it is one of my favorite games. This is my second character. I have a first character that's 58th level. I have enjoyed every minute of this game. I love the systems. I like the story. I love the setting, and some of the music actually in the beginning reminds me of Game of Thrones, like on the Night's Watch when they're up north in the early seasons. But anyway, I digress. But you would think that we would have a bunch of games that are basically the spit and image of Dark Souls. You know, outside of From Software, they made Dark Souls 2, of course. They made Bloodborne, and I'm going to tell you, Bloodborne is amazing. Improved combat. It's a little bit more forgiving, but it's still hard. It's a fantastic... Bloodborne is a fantastic game, and I highly recommend it. And, of course, Lords of the Fallen. And, of course, I also downloaded recently a 2D game called Salt and Sanctuary, which is like plays just like the same kind of basic thing as Dark Souls, like a 2D Dark Souls. But how come is it that out of From Software and this one-off from City Interactive, I don't think they have any plans to make a sequel, and just a random Salt and Sanctuary, that there hasn't been other developers who's embraced the idea of making Dark Souls type games. And I think the issue that you run into, what you run into as a game company, is so many games, from your Call of Duties of the world and your Divisions and Rainbow Sixes and your online and your offline games and all these other games, they hold your hand. And I think because they spend so much money on the game, I think developers are scared to alienate their audience. But we don't want to make a game that's so hard or challenging or frustrating that people won't give it a chance, even though clearly from the sales of the Souls series and Bloodborne, and for the upcoming Dark Souls 3 and Lords of the Fallen, which sold respectively, that that we are willing to embrace that. But I think a lot of developers are scared because they figure if we make a game with that kind of mentality, that players will get turned off and not buy our game. And it's really for them almost a matter of risk and reward. And I, for one, am kind of on a double-edged sword here. I wish there was more games like in those type of genres. And there just simply isn't, you know. And the other turn, though, I'm also happy that it's kind of its own niche market. You know, it's not something that is for everybody. There are people who would never want to play a game like this. They want to be held their hand. They want to have, you know, a babysitter to be by their side, and oh, it's okay, everything's going to be fine, and, you know, where these other games, you know, you should come with a towel so you can wipe your vag off with, you know, because you just can't handle, oh, it's too daggone hard, it's too this. You know, I grew up in that Nintendo era, you know, where you play a game like Castlevania, you get 5 lives, or 3 lives, and, like, 3 continues, and you better beat the game, or it's pasta lasagna, don't get any anya time, you know. You gotta start over from the beginning. Good luck with that, you know. They were unforgiving, and you learn by trial and error. Excuse me. And that's the thing. So I think developers, have to ask them this question: do we to Souls or not to Souls? We'd love to make a game like that because they're popular, but do we really want to alienate our audience? Do we really want to be do something that make people, you know, not want to buy our game? Or they're not happy because it's too hard, or it's too this, or it's too that. And I think personally, you know, it's an interesting argument, because in one hand they spend a whole lot of money and a whole lot of time developing games. It's like they really do want us to see their entire game. Believe it or not, I've played Dark Souls, but I've never really reached the end. The game is punishing and difficult, and I'm not saying that I'm like the best player in the world or the worst. It's just that it's a Herculean effort for me to get as far as I did in the first place in that game. And but it didn't mean that I didn't love it any. But I would love to experience some of the really late stuff. I went about 75% through it, and it's one of the things that I talk about because I think it's somebody could say, well, you never got to see the end of that game, and that kind of sucks for you. But at the same time, it's like it wasn't really about me beating the game. It was about me challenging myself to see if I could play the game in the first place. I'd heard so much about it. For me, Dark Souls represents a game that is challenging and difficult, and everything about it is interesting. Its world, its design. But I think a lot of developers out there, you know who you are, EA, Ubisoft, the big companies out there, Activision. I think they're fearful of taking gambles and risks with games like that. Imagine playing, a Call of Duty that was very challenging and difficult as a campaign, even on and that you could die very easily or quickly. And I think if it had those Souls-like moments, I think it would be more rewarding personally. And because right now, the campaign is a pushover because they give you so much, regenerating health, and they do all this stuff to make the game easy. And they're like, yes, we want you to play through it because we want you to experience our game. We spent, all this time and effort and marketing into it. We don't want it to be hard, When I think about that mentality, I don't know if I can really agree with that, because I'm not saying every game should be like Dark Souls or that type of style of gameplay, but I really feel like that game companies out there don't want to take the opportunity to challenge us in an interesting way, and so we don't get that, and I think it's interesting that only outside of From Software, other than City Interactive and now Salt and Sanctuary, a 2D, the company that made that game, they're the only ones that's really tried to create that experience, and to successfulness. As a matter of fact, there's almost a formula now. And what? Oh, sorry guys. Word from the sponsor. Today's episode of Gaming Roundtable is brought to you by Beer in the Throat. Back to you, Juice Man. But thank you very much, sponsors. So, I think as a gamer, like I said, I don't want all my games to be like Souls, but I would like to see more developers go out on a limb and understand that we don't need to be completely 100%, handheld. It's nice that but your game, when I can sit there and say, what, your AI and the enemies in this game are pushovers, and I was able to beat, Black Ops 3's campaign in just a couple hours, is pretty ridiculous, in that sense. And because I think you want us to be able to experience the full measure of the game, but at the same time, I feel like that in doing so, though, the strength of your game is relying on your multiplayer, which is what that game is about. But when it comes to developers, I think that's the question: to Souls or not to Souls? Do we take a risk and alienate our gaming audience? Alienate our fans, and create a game that is like those games, and and people go all of a sudden hey, can we not handle it? Because there are people out there, and I've spoken to them, telling me that they find Dark Souls, they would love to be able to play it, but they just can't. It's too hard for them. They can't wrap their gaming minds around the fact that this game is designed the way it's designed. They can't look at the game and say, it's almost like they're like they can't figure out why the game isn't holding their hand. Why is the game, not giving them tutorial hints? Why is the game like where the enemies can hit me in one or two? Like, and I realized most of the gaming industry are designed for that casual game. They're not designed for the old school guys like myself that grew up with those games. Where, I can get to a point where I can get through Castlevania with one life. Yes, that was months of playing the game and remembering patterns and all that other stuff. But when I think about it, I look at myself and go, you know what, that was an accomplishment. And gamers play these games now, and they're so easy, you're not accomplishing shit. And all you're accomplishing is the game did most of the work for you. Oh, I'm hurt, let me duck behind something, and now I get my health back. Like, no, that's not how it really works. But anyway, it's that, of course, trend. That's, there's a certain way that things are made now. And what is bothersome to me, put the controller down for a second, is, I want to see games not necessarily adopt the fact to be like Dark Souls or the Souls type series type games, but I want you to say, you know what, let's not just hold their hand all the way through it. Let's make some things challenging in interesting ways, not difficult for the sake of being difficult, which is what Dark Souls 2 is suffering from. But let's make things, how do we make this an interesting and challenging game? And so far, I've played, The Crew, I've got, Black Ops 3, I own those games. I own the Rainbow Six and Division and Destiny and Darksiders 2 and, all the, of course, everybody knows my love for the Koei games, the Dynasty Warriors and all the games they put out. I love those games. I practically have all of them. Give us something that is, if you're not going to make a game like the Souls, but you can borrow ideas from it. And the ideas, I'm not saying like, draining stamina and enemies the regular peon enemies can kill you. No. Borrow the idea of an interesting and challenging thing. Well, don't give us everything in the story and everything and have us use our imagination a little bit. Have us like find the lore into stuff where you got to read through stuff. Don't always just hand us everything on a silver platter, which is what so many of these game companies are doing. And I think over time you just kind of expect them now to do that. And to me, it just I think belittles your title a little bit in many ways. And to me, I feel like that, yes, to Souls or not to Souls, that is the question of the day. Do we make a game that is interesting and challenging and difficult in an interesting way to where you have to be on your A game, learn an enemy pattern, figure out the best way to handle that situation that you're in? Or do developers going to keep giving us just like, here, we're going to hold your hand the whole time, and here's a towel to wipe your badge off, and here's this and that and this and that. And I think that is one of the problems plaguing the game industry, because when you could sit there and you read reviews, and a Game Roundtable never reviews anything, but you'll read reviews, and they'll say something like, yeah, complete the game in under 7 or 8 hours. You're like, on the hardest difficulty, you're still able to pretty much get through the game and make short work of it? That don't seem right to me. That makes no sense, because I feel like that should be harder than that. And for some, that shows you that these games are actually not that challenging even on the hardest difficulty. There's something not right about that. Hard should be hard. Easy should be easy. And not like this, well, it wasn't that bad on hard because of this or whatever. And I feel like that you're again, it's that concept of we want the gamer out there to be able to experience the entire game. it's like, well, they eventually will. You know, don't treat us like 5-year-old gamers who can't handle anything. Because that's kind of the way I feel sometimes. Like, you look at us like we're children, and yes, there are children that play these games, but I'm saying I'm not one of them. So don't treat me like a child just because you think that's what I want. And and I think developers should say this: to souls or not to souls? That is the question today. Do we do something that's going to challenge the player and make that game that they're playing interesting and dynamic? Or do we make the game interesting, but it will never be difficult? It will never be hard. It will never be, they'll always have the advantage. It's like when Oblivion came out by Elder Scrolls in the 360, and I found out that the enemies in the game are always at 2 levels below your character, no matter what level you are. So even at level 1, the creatures you encounter and fight are always weaker than you on the normal difficulty level. And I'm like, but why? But then they criticized Too Human, one of my favorite roleplay games, because they did patch it later and fixed all the problems. That game's amazing, and, F you and the A if you don't agree with me. My point is, no, you can disagree with me. I'm okay with opinions. But my point is that people said, well, I don't like Too Human because I'll go to this one area and it's like a desert and it's cool, but I'm facing some giant dragon, or I'm in this plains, I'm fighting a giant ogre, I'm level 5, and he just kills me in one hit. He's a 15-foot tall ogre, and that's a zone you don't go into until you can get to that area and you can fight him with the proper levels and weapons. Why would you? And people hated that game for that. It was like, but there's a zone you don't go. That's like if I, not being a trained MMA fighter, challenged McGregor to a fight in the ring. Why the hell would I go there without the proper training and necessary skill? And so players bitching, as they are, about that, to me, was just like, no, that's not how it works, and yet Too Human was very much overlooked by most, not Too Human, but Two Worlds was very much overlooked by most gamers, which was out at the time when Oblivion came out. And yet, in all honesty, Oblivion, to me, and I know this is going to really get some people butthurt over it, but was boring. I was bored with that game. It's like, what I got to do, put the difficulty up to max, to where I actually get a challenge? And that to me was sad, because it shouldn't have been like that, It should have been, it just shouldn't have been like that. 2 levels below my character, you mean every monster I fight? And now let's forget, now, I like Skyrim a whole lot better, but it suffered from the same problem. That was one of the most easy games I have ever played. The game was fun, the crafting was interesting, it's a very fun game to play, the graphics were excellent. I've put like 300 hours into the game, but let me tell you, by the time that I almost maxed out my character in level and skills, and I've had to fight Alderaan with black wings unfurled, and he'll bring about the end of the world, and all this bullshit in the game's lore, I killed Alderaan, or whatever, in 3 hits. The final boss, you mean the dragon of all dragons that's bringing about the end of the world, and I kill it in 3 hits on the normal difficulty? And why was anybody scared of this thing in the first place? You could have got an army together to kill it. If you think about it on that terms, turn around and you play a game like Dragon's Dogma, brilliantly made game, which had some Souls-like elements to it, although it was not like the game, but it was similar in some regards. And this is a game company decided to bring some roleplay game that was interesting and challenging, but not overtly difficult, that took some ideas from Souls, but it's not that game. It doesn't really share a lot in common with the game, as far as like having a stamina meter when you fight and things like that. But it didn't have the same vibe, but it had similarities. And yeah, fight the Ender Dragon, the dragon in that, with its multiple life bars across the screen that's flying around. You got to jump on its back. It's the size of a building. That fight is grueling. And it's like, that's how it should be. The dragon in Dragon's Dogma, the main villain, wipes his ass with the dragon from Skyrim any day of the week. And that's what I'm talking about. Capcom decided to embrace a little bit of that Souls mentality, and that game is fantastic. It is one of the best, probably underrated roleplay games to come out of yesteryear. And that's true. That game is fantastic. And again, that's not because, I'm a big Capcom fan. Trust me, I'm not. It's just, that game was really well made and designed. And they took some of those Souls elements from that game. And yes, there are many things about Skyrim that are better than Dragon's Dogma. But Dragon's Dogma was absolutely just a fantastic game all the way around. And I think it's a crying shame that nobody really embraced that game. Another game that took some Souls elements, but wasn't completely like that, was Bound by Flame by Spiders. A criminally underlooked roleplay game that Razorfist Rageaholic, a man I'm subscribed to, how you doing, buddy? Who really talked about how well made this game was, and he was flabbergasted by it. But it also took some Souls elements. It's kind of similar, and but not completely like that game. But it has those elements, and I think that's really interesting because again, they did the same thing. They figured, we're not going to totally mimic Dark Souls, but they did take some elements from that, and that game is much better for it. It's so much a better game for it. So I think at the end of the day, wrapping up this episode of Gaming Roundtable for you, I just want to point out that at the end of the day, developers, give us something interesting and challenging. Look at Dark Souls, but don't give us that game, but look at what they did to make their game such a well-loved series. That's what you need to do. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find that you're not alienating your player base, but what you're doing is creating a very living, interesting, dynamic, challenging game that makes us keep coming back and back for more. And hopefully you can recognize the importance of that. And I think you would be better off in the end of the day. Anyway, this is JuiceMan3941. That's my PSN tag. Check me out at wordpress.org, or is it .com? It's one of the two. I got a blog there, Gaming Roundtable, all things games discussion. I want to give a personal shout out to Razorfish, Rageaholic, Rachel Moore, Angry Joe, the 1316 Killer, Review Tech USA, Gemquisition. What's up, guys? Keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. This is the Gaming Roundtable. Coming soon, episode 2. Stay tuned. And as always, good gaming.